But tonight, we are here to talk about healthcare manufacturing and all the things in between. We are super lucky to have Jeanette Numbers, the co-founder of Loft, joining us tonight. There are multiple.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, you want to tell a little about yourself?
Sure. Quickly, we're a design and engineering group here located in Providence, right next door to Venture Café. So we're great neighbors, part of this growing community of medical device focused innovators, and excited to see the energy growing. And I really want to hear from the rest of the community tonight about what you all are doing. So I'm here really as a little bit of a technical moderator to kind of dig in deeper into some of the specifics, but you all are the experts, so I'm really excited to hear what you've been up to.
Thank you so much for being our first. And
yeah, okay, well, super. Yep. Well, actually, I'm going to do a quick handshake over to Melissa Simon from Rhode Island Commerce, and she can tell us how she hasn't been sleeping for several weeks. But again, lots of energy and excitement and progress happening. And please, Melissa, tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, sure. And please at any time interrupt if you have questions, otherwise I can keep going. So for those of you who don't know me, Melissa Simon, I work for Rhode Island Commerce. My real job is supposed to be business development within the life sciences. So supporting our life sciences ecosystem here, and then also trying to attract in companies from outside the state to relocate and expand here. I can say that for the past month, I have done zero of that because I was deployed about a month ago to basically work for the Department of Health, specifically around COVID testing and helping to stand up all the COVID testing that we're doing. So several of us from Commerce were kind of loaned out of sorts to do a number of different things supporting testing. Some of my colleagues are helping to procure and manufacture ventilators. Others are working on masks and other PPE or personal protective equipment. Kunal, I know, is going to talk later about the work that he's been doing, support a lot of these efforts. But Matt Vargas and I are the two lucky Commerce people who are on the testing team. So we've been working very closely with the Department of Health lab, supporting efforts, including trying to get supplies so that we can run tests. That's one of the big issues that we've been having, or really the whole country has been having, has just been shortages of literally everything. So from a testing standpoint, it's a shortage of the swabs and the little tubes of media that you put the swabs in after you take the sample. It's a shortage of all of the supplies that are needed at the lab to actually run the test and determine if that sample has COVID. So we've been working sort of endlessly trying to procure all the supplies that are needed and building in a lot of redundancies. The sort of learning is you have to basically expect that 75 to 80% of what you order is not going to show up. So it's been a fun task, and Patrice has been a great advisor in some of this to help with some of these efforts. But happy to say that as of right now, we have a fairly well-functioning state lab. We have a well-functioning lab at Rhode Island Hospital. We have partnerships with commercial labs. And I think the governor mentioned in her press conference earlier today that our testing per capita is double our neighbors, which has been very exciting to see that expansion over the past 2 weeks, in particular with the National Guard drive-through sites and the rapid testing site that CBS has at the Twin Rivers Casino. We're not stopping there. We're continuing to look at other testing options, including how we can get testing sites in other locations instead of sort of making people go to these major drive-through sites. How can we get some of the testing in in areas of Providence and Pawtucket and other cities across the state. We're also looking to expand into different types of tests. So for those of you who are molecular biologists or understand that, most of the tests that are being done now are looking for current disease, so people that currently have the virus. But there are other tests out there that instead of testing the nasal swab, test blood, and they're looking for the presence of antibodies, which can be indicative of having some immunity. So that is really sort of the key to getting everybody back to work, is understanding what the true spread has been of the disease across the state. A lot of, there's a lot of asymptomatic people, so really understanding how many people are out there that have immunity, that's really going to be key to understand, to opening up, the state again. And so we're actively looking to put together a strategy about how to do these blood tests sort of across the state, really trying to test large numbers of people to understand what the true spread of the virus has been, and sort of tracking that. So there's been a lot going on. It's been, from my perspective, it's fun. I have a science background. I did a PhD in biomedical engineering and did a lot of these types of tests when I was in my PhD, and I left the lab for a reason, but it's been kind of interesting to sort of go back and now have to dive into the science. And I've spent my morning looking at sensitivity and specificity of a variety of different tests. So it's been interesting, but it's obviously a lot of work, and things are moving very fast. As soon as one thing sort of gets solved, something else pops up, and it's sort of a moving target. So it's busy, but been
Great. So that's really great information and news we can all be proud that is happening locally. I believe we are, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of 3 states, or at least locations, who is doing this particular rapid response. Is that correct?
The CBS model? Yes, I believe we're one of 2. They're going to expand soon to a couple other states, but we were the one of 2 pilot states.
Yeah, so that's
us in
exciting.
Georgia.
Right. Could you speak to the lab portion in particular? So when you talked about supplies a little bit, and sort of like what you're in essentially procurement at the moment, but could you talk a little bit more about the supply and what's happening, if anything, locally?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of there's been a lot going on locally. So I'll start with the actual testing kits. So I mentioned one of the big shortages that is across the country is the actual swab that goes up your nose, and the viral transport media, which is the tube that comes with the swab, that after you take the sample, you put it in the tube and you transport that to the lab. Those are in very short supply across the country, and we started off a while ago. We were on the phone calling like every physician's office in the state, trying to figure out, do you have leftover flu kits that we can use? Calling universities and seeing if they had any in labs. One of the big sort of breakthroughs from the swab standpoint, it was in Projo or PBN, is Contact Medical was able to procure 60,000 swabs. They were not sterile. And it was a situation where we weren't sure if it was quite the right swab. They were able to get one as a sample, and there were like 5 other companies trying to vie for the 60,000 swabs, and they were just like, forget it, we're just going to buy it. So we got these 60,000 swabs, had conversations with the FDA, figured out what the sterilization process was, got them sterilized. They are now good to go. And so we were able to work past that limitation just via company here helping us out with procurement. The second piece of that being the little tube of media. So because of the shortages there, the CDC put out a recipe for homemade transport media. So we put a call out to a number of labs in the state of who could help us make this media. The Department of Health lab was looking to do it, but they're so strapped they have to actually run the tests that they didn't want to make the media. So we had Jay Curtis, who is a professor at Brown, helped us out in his lab. He made, I think at this point, has made about 4,000 or 5,000 tubes of the media in his own lab using his own resources, which was a great donation from Brown.
That's amazing.
We have a Thide lab in Warwick who is making us, I believe their total amount they're going to be making us is about 50,000 tubes. And then we also have Amgen, who we're still working out the details, but is probably going to be making us another 60,000 tubes. So that is one where it's a very homemade process. We have they're truly Rhode Island kits, because they've all been made and put together here. So that's been a really great story of having a lot of local companies come together and figure out this process. And you know, from our standpoint, getting people tested is no longer the limitation, which is great to sort of be able to knock out one of those hurdles.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know tonight, as people are filtering in, we're going to have a lot of the community who is in the 3D maker space and 3D printers. And so, you know, anything we can share that points in that direction of places where the community like that can help. And specifically, I think there's a question in the chat about the sterilization process. So are you familiar with what was used for the swabs in particular?
So it had to be, I know it had to be sent away to a specific facility that abides by FDA regulation. It's not ethanol. I want to say it's like gamma radiation, maybe.
UV possibly, or?
I don't know. I'll have to get back to you, but I know that we had to send it to a specific facility to get sterilized. That was, you know, abides by FDA.
And as we all, you know, energize and try and come together to find solutions for different pieces where we can help, it's great to know from an experience level what things need to go through additional clearances as far as the FDA is concerned and things like that. So I hope to use tonight as a little bit of an education about that, so we all know sort of where we can help and where we need to call for support, just to make sure we all want to help, but we do need things to be safe and effective in the end. So it's great to hear you guys work through that really quickly. I've also heard the FDA has been extremely responsive, which is great to hear. So, you know, literally taking phone calls. So it's good to hear.
Yeah, they were, my colleague Matt Vargas was more involved with this actual process, but it was a situation where they got the swabs in, they called up the FDA, within, you know, minutes were able to get an answer of exactly what it was, and the FDA called some sterilization lab, and the sterilization process apparently is typically a like multi-week process, and through conversations with the FDA they were able to get that facility to cut it down to like 10 days. So it really expedited the process. So to your point, FDA has been very responsive in all of this, which has been helpful.
Great. In case anyone is interested in the details, it looks like we've got a couple people popping up on the chat to say that gamma or ETO are the two major sterilization methods. So good to know. We can maybe publish some information more about that to any, as I said, any of the makers in the space who are interested in getting things sterilized. Cool. So anything else from your side, Melissa, that you wanted to share or have the community know about?
I mean, I think I've been very focused on the testing. I don't know. I can't think of anything. I mean, I'm happy to take any questions, but
Sure.
I mean, I will say that we are, you know, Commerce is also looking at, you know, probably most people here are familiar with a lot of the Commerce funding mechanisms that we have, innovation vouchers and matching grants and what have you. You know, there is a lot of discussion about how we can help and customize our programs to sort of the new normal. So nothing to announce now, but, you know, there are a lot of efforts to really think about how we can better help bring the economy back up, continue to support it through all these transitions. So if there are ideas, thoughts, definitely share. But just know that we are doing all we can to try to support as many people as we possibly can.
That's great, great. Well, some really good information. Thank you for sharing and thank you for your time. Definitely appreciate it. Appreciate all you're doing on your sleepless nights to get us there. As far as testing goes, it seems like a good time to ask Patrice to jump in and share maybe her expertise on what's been happening in her side. So without further ado, Patrice, are you ready to jump in?
Sure, and I have to applaud Melissa's effort because it really is a Herculean task given what the regulations are that exist for testing in a clinical laboratory and all the hurdles that you have to go through, I think the other thing is there's a variety of tests. So it's not like everybody's using the same test, which is good. I think there's probably, obviously the CDC had an initial test that was not performing as well as it should. I think it's okay now, Melissa. I'm not sure if people are still using it, but there's a variety of tests that run anywhere from 4 hours on an instrument to a 15-minute test. And these are all for detection of the viral nucleic acid. They have to be run in a CLIA laboratory, and these are certified laboratories by CMS that meet the rigor and the quality standards that need to exist in a clinical testing laboratory. So my past job was running one of these clinical laboratories where we did pediatric molecular diagnosis. And it really is very different than what happens in a normal laboratory. So, when you get these swabs and you want to use them, it can be really frustrating because of the hurdles you have to go through to get there. But testing is really fundamental to where this country needs to go. I mean, we were unprepared. Our departments of health across the country are so burdened with so much effort to now be trying to think that they're going to add large-scale testing without a federal government that's really sort of coordinating and organizing is very difficult. And Rhode Island has done a great job. I think the governor said today they did like 1,700 tests in a state of what, 1.2 million people. Testing is going to get this country back. And, I can refer you to so many different individuals. The former FDA Commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, is doing a great job every day talking about what we need to be doing to restore the economic vitality of this country. And much of it is through testing. And as Melissa said, it's, do I have the virus or have I had the virus? Those are the two questions that we need to ask and need to know. And if you have it, you need to know who else might be at risk of having it as well. And that's the whole contact tracing, which has been done really well in Germany from the first outbreak. And if you look at the numbers in Germany, the incidence and the hospitalizations are so much lower than what exists in the rest of the world. Oh gosh, there's so many things that I could talk about. Really, it's Jeanette, what you think is important to add?
Yeah, well, when we talked on the phone the other day, one thing that I thought was particularly interesting is where you see the future going,
Yes.
sort of maybe near-term months, and then beyond that in terms of testing in real time, and even outside of what we might think of as a lab, but maybe even on site at, say, your corporate headquarters.
Right. I mean, and Melissa has seen this unfold. When CVS announced they were going to offer the Abbott rapid test at Twin River the other day, I was jumping up and down. It's a 15-minute test, and they could do 1,000 people a day. They're doing it in Lowell, Massachusetts, and they're doing it in Georgia. So I spent about 2 days writing a piece for the Providence Journal that was published on Saturday, which really I said the future is massive testing. And can we think a little differently than what Melissa and her colleagues are going through? And that is the standard clinical laboratory that has to abide by all the rigor, qualifications, and everything, and turn to a future where we might see every CVS Minute Clinic having one of these instruments for testing the virus or testing the antibody or testing both, frankly, or the workplace. So imagine Brown University thinking about, how do I bring my students back in the fall? How do I surveil my community to ensure a low incidence of virus on campus? to keep my students and my faculty safe. And then be able to monitor if somebody does come up with early signs of the virus and detect it, where do they go? How do you quarantine them? How do you contract trace all the other people? But it's really thinking differently about how we as companies can think differently about how we own this as well. So it's just something I like to think about.
Yeah, I agree. I can imagine a future where we do have some checkpoints, and again, we want to be ahead and not having to react as much, but to respond a bit more. And it might add some protocols as you check into these particular, companies, but the whole goal is to avoid really being in a reactive state and being proactive.
I mean, I think one of the things, as Melissa was saying, serology testing, which is looking for the presence of these two different types of antibodies, IgM and IgG, that exist in a person's blood after exposure to the virus and acquiring it. I think we were really hopeful that the incidence of people being serology positive would be much higher than we anticipate. But we're starting to see some of the data coming out of places like Germany, where they've done a small scale study of about 500 people, and they only found about 15% of people positive for the antibody, which says there's still a lot of exposure potentially to occur. And so we were hoping, and you could hear Dr. Fauci talking about this in the briefings, that it may be as much as 50%. But I think we're seeing in these small pilot studies, it's probably not likely to be that. There's another one being done in Telluride of about 8,000 people. So everybody's, and as Melissa said, this changes every 12 hours. There's a new test, a new study, a new understanding of the crystal structure of the virus. There's so much happening.
Yeah, it just goes to, show information is the key. That's power. To knowledge is power. We're living in a fear state right now, which is, got all kinds of implications. And the more that we can learn about what's really happening, and that means from a testing perspective, knowing what's happening individually, the more power we have to go on into that new future. So,
and I think Rhode Island has a totally unique opportunity to do this. A small population. Imagine testing half the population for virus, for antibody. It would be amazing.
Can I record you saying that for a call I have at 5 o'clock?
Yes.
So, and Melissa, you can maybe put on your hat from a month ago for bringing business. We often at Loft promote Rhode Island and Providence in particular as a city-state for a test bed for new products, because we have such a unique community here and a very close quarters. And this is another perfect opportunity for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the reason why CBS chose Rhode Island for their pilot for this, they should because they're here, but it's also because of the small size and the fact that they could have such a significant impact. That 1,000 people going through their site is huge for the state. You put that in someplace like California, 1,000 is still a lot of people, but not making the same kind of impact. So I think from in a lot of ways, this is really highlighting that we're small, we're nimble, we can, small things make a large impact. We're working super closely with all the health systems. Everyone is very coordinated and what have you through all these efforts. And so I think, I agree. I think it's a huge, selling point for others looking to come in that can really make an impact.
Yeah, that's great. We've got a quick technical question for Patrice, hopefully. The question is, what is the percentage of false positives and negatives on the 15-minute test?
The 15-minute test is the Abbott test, although I think the Cepheid is also a rapid test.
Cepheid's 45 minutes.
Yeah, Cepheid's longer, but the Abbott, and Melissa, you may know this better because I think when they released the test, the data was still very preliminary. Yeah. So we should have better information on that now. So you may know that specifically.
I don't know the updated numbers. I want to say that like the sensitivity and specificity were in the low 90s
Yes.
for the Abbott. I mean, we did within the state our own internal validation for the first several that went through the Abbott test. We did a full nasal swab and sent it to the state lab to confirm. And so we were comfortable with moving forward with it. So yes, it's not perfect. I mean, if you're looking for like the best, still the one that is the full nasal swab and done with the full PCR in the lab is better, but the Abbott is pretty good. And the fact that it can give you the answer that quickly, and we can scan that many people is still a benefit.
Yes, definitely.
Super cool. And with that, we're going to invite Jay Round next. Jay, are you ready to jump in?
Sure. I think I have some stuff that overlaps with what Patrice shared. I did read her Projo opinion piece that was put out a few days ago, and I do agree that the near-term, not just challenge, but the near-term opportunity probably lies for small businesses to pursue diagnostic platforms. And for those that are not too familiar with the context, usually diagnostics are a minimal value opportunity in biotech. Therapeutics are the main show, but I think there might be a pivot coming as people realize how important it is to dial into the populations as infectious disease spreads. And I shared a link, which you mentioned cannot be clicked, but it's at unheard.com. And it goes into the specifics that Patrice and also Melissa were alluding to, and the difficulty of using diagnostics without appropriate population-based statistics. So a lot of these diagnostics, whether they are PCR virus detecting ones, or if they're the antibody ones that tell you whether you've had the disease, not just whether you have it, rely on mass scale testing to power the data that is generated. So the specificity and the sensitivity are highly dependent on the amount of people that receive diagnostics. So when the CDC or whoever it is runs around getting diagnostic tests done, it's not so much to determine on an individual level whether or not you have COVID, it's to determine whether COVID is progressing throughout the population. And to do that properly, you can't even determine yourself whether you have COVID without knowing what percentage of the population has it, because a lot of it's just the way the statistics work. So that's why it's important to have these CVS type drive-throughs. I think most people are thinking, oh, I don't have COVID. They let out a big exhale, but it doesn't matter until we get a certain number of people tested. What that number is, there's certainly some math involved. I don't know what it is for a population the size of the United States or Rhode Island, but we're certainly not there yet. But in light of that, I do have a couple slides, if you guys don't mind me sharing quickly to go through, because I think it's better than just staring at my face. It kind of, I was asked to just speak about the general entrepreneurial opportunities and where business is heading with regards to this COVID epidemic and this tangential economic collapse. Good news is, I believe, those are the resources I was going to share. Everybody knows those. Biotech investment in pharma is going pretty well. They actually haven't missed a step. Now, whether that is because there's a delay in financing where all these funds have raised money, but they haven't yet had an excuse not to send it out into the markets. It's tough to say, but as of today, some of the biggest funds in Boston's history have been raised during this COVID epidemic. Flagship had over $1 billion financing. And I think it's tough to say whether or not those are trustworthy activities, but the fact is, if you are an entrepreneur looking for financing today in life sciences, apparently the money's still flowing. One thing I would mention is that, and I hope, is that there's going to be a pivot towards more domestic reagent and diagnostic production and CRO and R&D support. Right now, we send about 20% of all US R&D is done overseas, primarily in China. And if that changes, that's a huge opportunity for kind of the secondary states in the life science bubbles, because maybe we can find that CROs pick up more reagents, get provided on a domestic basis. So there could be a huge opportunity. 20% of R&D is something like, almost $20 billion. So that's a big opportunity injection, assuming that's where the markets go. But regarding the diagnostics, as I mentioned, Patrice had a nice article. If everyone's not aware, there's PCR versus antibody diagnostics. And I think the near-term opportunity for a state like Rhode Island is to jump in the diagnostic field, primarily the antibody-based ones, the serological ones, because those are the ones that are going to deliver the most value. If you go to that link that is unclickable, talks about the concept of immunity passports. And the idea is with serological antibody assays, we can figure out who's not just had it, but who's resistant to getting it again. So you can send them back out to work with confidence, because there's a lot of risk involved in sending someone out that hasn't actually had COVID or might in fact have COVID, in that it can restart the pandemic. So all that uncertainty is removed with more serological testing. I did look into some of the tests. There are 38 tests that the FDA has provided exemption to that I could find exemptive use. Obviously, the CDC kind of kicked it off with their somewhat false start on diagnostic testing. But there's a lot that have followed on. I know Rhode Island's taking those on as well.
Jay, I think there's somebody was telling me yesterday, over 100 LDTs that have been approved for viral testing now.
Ooh, maybe. Does that include Europe?
In the US, because so many people are developing in their own labs, their own tests.
All right.
These types of tests. I was blown.
Yeah, that is a ton of opportunities, and I don't know what kind of value can be built if you're an investor, you're an entrepreneur that wants to create that next test. But a lot of that can be dictated by our experience back in 2014 with the much smaller Ebola epidemic that kind of feels much less like an epidemic now looking back. But the fact of the matter is, we learned a bit about that. We learned a bit about how the tests get developed, what the urgency, what the market will bear. Corgenics was the first one to make one, and they actually exited $16 million. Not a huge amount, but Ebola was several orders of magnitude smaller in the US than COVID. So one can imagine a greater return. But what I've got here are actually the 3 independent, meaning non-hospital associated CLIA labs in Rhode Island. 2 of them are owned by Eastside Clinical, and the third is Dominion Diagnostics down in Kingstown. And these represent entities within the state that might be better positioned to quickly develop a diagnostic test and capitalize on some of the value that can be made. Because right now, when we do a diagnostic of a Rhode Islander, a portion of that value is being delivered upon reimbursement, which I think is kind of an iffy situation right now, to the company that makes that diagnostic. And I found somewhere that they're being reimbursed at $10 to $20 per test, depending on what it is. I'm not sure if that was a serological test or if that was PCR, but that's money that's leaving the state. And when there's over 100 diagnostic kits being produced, it'd be unfortunate if Rhode Island didn't produce one so that we could take advantage of the economic.
Jay, Dominion Diagnostic is very interested in the serology assay and trying to bring up a high throughput ELISA-based assay, which I think would be great.
Trying to get in touch with Bob Garvey, I believe is the CEO. And
Melissa's in touch with the woman who's the laboratory director, who's the one who is really interested in bringing it on.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear, because it's best to work with what we've got. And what we've got are these 3 independents. I mean, you can ask the hospitals to do it, but I think it's best if someone who's not absolutely, very occupied at the moment could do it. So, you apply for an EUA, and who knows, some real value could come out of that. I also took a look at therapeutics just because it's worth knowing. Everybody's heard about chloroquine. I won't make any comments regarding it. It was in a fairly well-received Nature paper in February, alongside remdesivir, which is a Gilead product that is currently being tested in 133 sites, one of which is Rhode Island Hospital. So if you want to take a flyer out on who's going to get a treatment first, there's a lot of talk about vaccines, but it's my humble opinion that an antiviral will probably hit the market sooner rather than vaccines. And that is because these antivirals have been screened and characterized extensively due to other viral infectious outbreaks. So remdesivir actually struck out on Ebola, and now they're trying to dust it off, and it's already in phase 3. So it's already cut through like 8 years plus of validation because they're taking an already mildly developed or heavily developed molecule. And it's always better to do a small molecule than a biologic. If you actually look at some of the therapeutics that are being quote unquote developed, they're talking about CAR T cells, they're talking about pretty much every kind of thing under the sun. But I think the fastest thing that's going to arrive would be an antiviral like that. And then Rhode Island's got a few that are tossing their hats in the ring. I know Epivax obviously is in the vaccine category. MindImmune, I heard, is doing something. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but they are pounding the pavement looking to progress that program. And Beach Tree.
Jay, MindImmune was very interested in Zithromax as a potential, given the mechanism of action. I don't know where that's gone, but I did see Pfizer make an announcement, but I don't think it was, maybe it was with Zithromax, Jay, I don't know.
That's a zithromycin?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can send out a link in a minute. I can't focus on it now, but yeah, zithromycin, I think there's some, it was done in the same trial by some folks with chloroquine, and they're not sure what the mechanism would be for why that worked.
Yeah, Jay, the thinking is that there was the study in France that did the combination of the two products, but the MindImmune people, because they're ex-Pfizer, believe that some of the benefits that were seen in the French study were driven more by the Zithromax than they were by the chloroquine. So that's the theory behind their thinking. And I think they're still trying to get some traction. They're working on it.
All right. So to conclude the abbreviated landscape, there's like 1,000 different things going on. I would, if you want to, predict the future you get nothing for predicting the future here, but.
Jay, you know what? I'm interested in serum from recovered patients, this idea of convalescent transfer from infected patients who survived now being given to really sick patients, and seeing some benefits there as well, I think is fascinating.
Yeah, I think plasma donation, I'm wondering if it's ever been used successfully in infectious disease. I imagine it has. I just don't know what that
I don't know.
example is. It sounds like a logistical kind of nightmare with hepatitis and having to characterize the plasma. And
it was fascinating. There was a Rhode Islander in the newspaper today, I think it was, or a story, who recovered, and he drove to Colombia to donate his blood for that reason.
Wow. I think I saw that. I think we're just screening the same internet pages. Wow. Yeah, that is also a candidate. And actually, I can send out a link to all these kind of more organized listing. I put on the right there. Those were my 5 J Rounds picks. But there's probably 75 plus out there. And obviously, there's a lot of Chinese companies that are developing it because they got a 2-month head start as far as going to the trials. That was it. So yeah, and I just want to mention that I think antivirals are the way to go. If you look back, the Ebola outbreak is one thing. The Ebola vaccine was approved back in December. So that's a 5-year delay. Now, I imagine the FDA and the government might put a little more gas behind the development of a vaccine for us with regards to COVID. And I know Moderna might have the best one out there, but the standard right now is 5 years, which is obviously untenable in today's situation. Alternatively, an antiviral back in the 90s, 87, AZT hit the record for any FDA approval. So there's actually a solid proof of concept that antivirals can be pushed along quicker, they can be produced at a greater quantity, and I think their price would be lower. I mean, God forbid a CAR T-cell therapy end up being the one that treats us, because the country would go bankrupt instantly, having to pay for that. So I think AZT offers a nice little pathway as to, if I were an antiviral guy, I'd be like, oh, let's just follow what they did. But a lot of exceptions were made by the government. So we would need the FDA and the administration to kind of make exceptions to match that. And I think that's it. I'm sorry, I don't know, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. I don't know.
While we're waiting for Annette, I did want to mention, I just took a quick look about what Amgen is doing, another Rhode Island company. I don't know if Jay or Patrice could speak to anything they're looking at down there, but are you guys familiar with anything Amgen is doing?
I think they're doing something with adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they've signed an agreement, right, with Adaptive to sequence the antibodies to try to see if that's an approach where they could sequence antibodies from patients who, again, have been recovered, to see if they could identify some key binders that could be potential biologic therapeutics.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good, agreed that the vaccine approach may take too long, and so these sort of therapeutics might be a quicker route there.
Everybody's trying everything.
Right. Super. Well, I see Annette on the screen. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Excellent.
Hey, so I'm here just to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am thrilled to be part of this with everybody in Rhode Island. It's really not fun in one sense, but in another sense, it actually is amazing to watch what's happening here, innovation happening in real time. And I know I'm here right before we're going to hear from Professor Kunal from URI, who, so RIHub is a fairly new organization here. We are the first of the innovation campuses that all of us voted on in 2016. And the point of RIHub is really to be an umbrella organization to ensure that we're enabling ideas to become startups, and from startups, enabling those to become standalone scaling businesses in our region. And with that, one of the most important aspects of what RIHub does and what we perform is we're connectors. So the point being, if, as not only entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs that are kind of thinking about what are they doing next, our goal is to connect them up in the ecosystem. One of the reasons why I'm here today is because we actually are performing that in real time with this event. And by virtue of being able to be part of what Professor Kunal is going to do, which he's going to talk about in a moment, our role was to connect up anybody that made sense at that moment to his group. It started out at about 10 people, I remember, and it's turned into what looks like hundreds, or at least somewhere in the high 50s, 60s. And we've connected up university folks from Brown, from URI, obviously URI's founded it, and then on top of it, we brought in RISD and a number of companies in our region that actually have capacity to do 3D printing. The goal here is to provide, first and foremost, personal protective equipment for frontline healthcare workers. And by doing that with, filling the gap or using 3D printers before we can get sort of the mass scale equipment that we need. And on top of that, we also brought 3D printing to bear for working on adapters for CPAP machines and BiPAP machines, as well as those adapters that actually could essentially put more than one patient. We know that's not optimal, but more than one patient on a ventilator. So RIHub, thank you for letting us be here, but we just want you to know a little bit more about us. In the coming months, you're going to hear a great deal more from us. We're building an online portal for everyone, free, And we actually do things like run the accelerators locally for Mass Challenge, CoWorks Foundry out of India, and IBM Alpha Zone out of Israel. We are also going to become a place where people can get introductions to investors, not just in our region, but anywhere that actually makes sense for them, as well as connecting entrepreneurs up with corporates that make sense for their verticals. And those corporate connections are important both for basically helping the company grow, but moreover, investment as well, so strategic investment. So that's a little bit about us, and I'm here because of the work that you know we're part of, just the ecosystem, if you will, to help connect. So that's really all I had to say. But thank you so much for letting us say it, and we're here at Venture Cafe with Tonti every week. That's our goal. We love what you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. Nice to see you. Miss you guys.
Yeah. Can't wait to go back.
Right. Super. Well, thank you again to Patrice, Jay, and Annette. Really great information. You know, please, if anyone has any more questions or wants to find out more about what they're doing, I think you'll find the links that Avi will send in the follow-up. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate the information you've shared today.